Holly. Welcome to the show today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're so thrilled to have you. This is a pretty chunky case study, which I'm really excited about. There's so many different facets and angles I want to dive into around your anti-social campaign, your anti-Black Friday. It's just a really novel idea, and I'm seeing this movement grow around people wanting to find other ways to market their business off of social media. So I think the timing is perfect, especially as when this episode airs, we're nearing the Black Friday, Cyber Monday mayhem. So, Holly, we'll get to that case study in just a moment. But first, of course, I want to hear your Cubicle to CEO story. How did you make that jump into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely a true cubicle to CEO story. I have a 22-year corporate strategy career, so I was like in it to win it in the corporate life for a really long time. And if I'm being honest, I never in a million years thought I would own my own business. Like it was never on the radar. I never thought it would be something that I would do. And the story that I love to tell is I was in grad school and it was some sort of finance class. I always joke like I don't do math after 3 p.m. I know it's important, but it's just not my favorite subject. And we had a guest speaker come in, and her name was Jenny Brittenbauer from Jenny's Ice Cream. She's from Columbus, Ohio, and she was just getting started. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to go like through her finances. I don't want to do this at 8 o'clock at night. And it was the total opposite. She came in and she was talking about how being able to run her business, which she makes like really curated, like fabulous ice cream, has been able to allow her to have more time with her family and make a bigger impact in the community. And at the time, I didn't have kids. I had just got married, and I was like, I think I'm thinking about this all wrong. Like I kept thinking like I want to have the office with the door that shuts and have the team and like have all the things. And I just remember her sharing that story, and I was like, I don't know if I can do that. Like I think I'm on the wrong path, which at the time was just like not the best moment because you just invest all this money into school and you think that you're doing all the right things. So long story short, I just sort of kept that idea in the back of my head. And a couple years later, was really thinking about, I think I could do something different. I think I can do something different. And so I just sort of dabbled in like mentorship inside the consulting companies that I worked for. So I did consulting for Fortune 500 companies, and we started building women's groups, and the Lean In book with Sheryl Sandberg came out. And so then we're creating women's groups and we're doing all these things. And I was like, oh, I really like this, right? Then I had twins, which will put everything on hold for a minute. And in January of 2020, I was like, you know what? I keep going back to that Jenny story of I want to make a bigger impact. I want to spend more time with my family. I don't want to sit in my car and drive, an hour a day. Like, what can I do differently? And so I kind of did it all backwards. And it was beginning of January 2020. I hired a coach and I said, I have all this experience. Help me build an online business. And so that's what we did. And we're almost 4 years in now.
Wow. Okay, I have a couple thoughts that ran through my head as you
Yeah.
were sharing your story. First thing, I was like, you don't look old enough to have 22 years of corporate experience. I was like, did you
Yeah.
start when you were 8?
No, I'm almost 45. So, we started a little bit later in life, but I think that's okay. I think 40s are like the best era yet. So,
No, it's a huge compliment to you. I was like, wow, like you are thriving and you look like you're in your early 30s. So I was like, that's
thank
really
you.
impressive that you had 22 years of corporate experience going into your entrepreneurship career. Also, congratulations. I know it was years ago, but congratulations on twins. I grew up with identical twin sisters. And so growing up in a family with twins is just so much fun. I know
Yeah.
as a mother, it's probably a completely different and at times challenging experience, but I love twins. So always love hearing that. And then I also think it's so cool that what really pulled you out of the corporate world after decades in it was being exposed to someone who was living life and doing business a little bit differently. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about bringing women like you, Holly, on our podcast, because who knows, a person that might be listening to this conversation today and afterwards, you spark something for them where they're like, I never even knew business could be done like that until Holly showed me. So I just think that access, or social capital, as I like to call it, that access to be in the rooms with people who can allow you and push you to think outside the box is so key, and we don't always all have that opportunity in our real lives like you did with Jenny. And so I'm just so glad that this podcast can kind of serve as a platform for that, which brings us right into the case study, which I am just so intrigued by this concept of anti Black Friday. So we're going to kind of start big picture, Holly, and then we're going to, get into the nitty gritty. But big picture, where was this idea for anti Black Friday sparked? Meaning, if you're looking at holiday sales as a whole, had you previously participated in Black
Yeah.
Friday or Cyber Monday sales before? And was your idea to start your own holiday, so to speak, the outcome of not seeing the results you wanted from participating in previous Black Friday sales? Or was it the opposite, where Black Friday sales were incredible for your business and therefore you thought, okay, let me take it a step further and actually create my own holiday around it?
Yeah, so good. I'm obsessed with case studies also because of my background. So I'm really excited to dig in. So, for me personally, I mean, if you think about the story that I just told, having time with my family and creating free time was really like the basis of my business. Like, I didn't want to be tied to someone else's schedule. And so, early on in my business, I did dabble in Black Friday sales because I just thought, well, that's what everyone's doing, right? Like everyone, I mean, you get a million emails in one day, like buy this, do that. And I did it. And I just remember it was like Thanksgiving Eve or whatever. And I was so freaking stressed out. I was like, oh my God, who's going to read this? Are they going to purchase this? Like, what's going to happen? And that feeling that I had was like, this is not how I want to run my business. I want to come up with a way where I can do it on my own terms. Maybe it is Black Friday, but it's definitely not me sitting in front of my computer. Like, I would so much rather be eating leftovers and watching football. So for me, I think, sometimes you have to go through it to realize that it's not for you. But I also think kind of what we talked about at the beginning is you don't have to do it the way that everyone else does. And one of the examples that I always give is Amazon Prime Day, which is in July. I think they have another one coming in October now. And basically, Amazon creates their own holiday because it's a downtime in their sales cycle. And so I was like, well, why can't I do that? Yes, it's a great time. November typically is a great time for sales, but it doesn't have to be that Friday. And then I started to dig into the statistics a little bit more and I was like, why am I competing with all of these big brands? Like, I'm not a big brand. I'm not, I don't have millions of followers. So why am I trying to compete with all those other people? If I could just do it the week before or the week after, it works for my schedule. And I think it actually works for my client's schedule as well.
Okay, I'm nerding out over this, Holly, because there was another guest who was on our show a couple months ago, Sam, who has an attorney background and, has a legal contract shop. And we were nerding out over how we love pulling inspiration from big business and then applying it to small business. So I totally see the draw of Prime Day, because you're right, like people have created a full basically holiday around it, like the amount of attention it gets and how much preparation people do. So I guess in taking that concept, this case study, you've done multiple live launches of Antisocial School and it's now an evergreen program. But the one launch that we're really focused on in this particular case study is the one from November 2022, where you did it completely off of social. You made $70,000. It's incredible. You chose to do that though, still in November. So my question is, knowing that, your inspiration was drawn from, let's say, Prime Day, where they chose to do it in an off-season cycle, why did you still choose to have your anti Black Friday during the November holiday season? And did you find that it was challenging to differentiate yours from the Black Friday mayhem?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I think for me, it always comes down to my personal schedule and family schedule first. So one of the things that I teach is to map out like what you actually want to do first and then build your business around it. And for us, we actually took our girls to Europe for 10 days before we launched this thing. And I wanted to have the holidays off. So for me personally, I wanted to do it in November, not only to make sure that we hit some of our revenue goals, but also what we were teaching was how to gain followers and gain a client attraction strategy, create a client attraction strategy without being online all the time. And so in theory, I thought, hey, I could actually get my clients the best results if they do this now before the end of the year, because what happens in January, everyone starts to launch whatever their thing is. So not only did it make sense from a calendar perspective for us and our family, But the theory was if people can enroll in antisocial school now, I can help them build a client attraction strategy. They can do it in a way where they're not working all the time. And then when they want to launch whatever their thing is in January, they're like set and ready to go. So I really try to look at it like twofold. Does it work for our family? I always say, like, don't launch some big, huge thing and then like your kids have dance camp or something. Like it just doesn't work. But also, is it a good time for your clients and does it make sense for what you're teaching?
Yeah, finding that intersection between the 2 I think is so smart. Have you launched your own holiday at other times of year? Because I know you've done this live launch multiple times, and if so, did you find any compelling information or data around, a particular month or time of year being more effective than another time of year?
Yeah, so we've done it in July too. And I mean, I think this goes back to my corporate background, and you kind of look at like the ebb and flow of revenue and when people are taking vacation and when people are investing. And so we always do like a Christmas in July. It's not as, fun as anti-Black Friday, but it works really well. And I think you see other people do that. It's not this like, intense, you have to do it on this certain day kind of thing, but it's worked well. And I think people are in a buying pattern in July where they're on vacation and they're like, oh, this is easy. I'll sign up for this now and then I'll execute it later. And so I think understanding your client's buying pattern and what's happening, but also what does your schedule look like? And I think too, I mean, we're all smart business women. Like, look at your revenue streams. Where do you have a dip? Like, can you create something that's going to really help move your clients into where you want them to go?
Absolutely. And one little nugget, you said it so quickly that I'm like, I don't know if our listeners pulled that out. So I'm going to re pull that out. I love what you said about when you launched in July, when you did that Christmas in July, you specifically chose a product that was easy to buy now and implement later. And I think that's a really key factor because, in my own experience of sometimes when I launch something that requires live participation, it becomes a schedule nightmare, right? Where people are like,
Yes.
"Oh, I don't have the capacity right now to be a participant." They want to, but they just don't have room on their calendar. Whereas what you're saying is like, if you can buy something that can be implemented at any time, it kind of resolves that challenge or obstacle right out the gate. So that was a really smart tip. Just wanted to make sure we pull that out for our listeners. Just to clarify, the one that you did in November, though, the anti Black Friday, is that what you called the holiday? And was it in early November then? I'm assuming if you wanted to get it out of the way.
Yeah, yeah. So we called it anti Black Friday. And the whole theory, which, fits my brand, is I don't want to work over the holidays. So let me give you all the tools that you need. You can do it before Thanksgiving. Then we'll set you up to be successful between now and the end of the year. And then in January, you'll be ready to go.
Love that. I'm so curious, outside of the name, did you do any distinct branding for this holiday? Did you build almost like a subculture around this holiday the same way that Amazon does with Prime Day? Like, how much did you really feed into, elevating this holiday, let's say, and creating a community around it versus just kind of choosing, okay, I'm going to launch earlier. I'm just curious how you approach that.
That's a great question. I probably should have done all of that, and maybe we will this year. We really focused on the word anti. So, anti social school and anti Black Friday. And so that's really where a lot of our marketing went to. If you can do this and you don't have to be on social all day long, and you can do this and you don't have to, be in front of your laptop the entire holiday season. And so that's sort of what we focused on. I'm a really simple launcher. Like, I know that there's a lot of really cool things that you can do, but if I'm being honest, it overwhelms me. And at the time, we were still a really small team. And so it was just me. And so we tried to keep it as simple as possible and really focus on why we're doing it during this time, what the outcome is, and then how you can really be a part of it so that you're setting yourself up for the new year.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I can relate to that so much. I'm definitely not that launcher that has like everything mapped out months in advance, everything pre-scheduled. I very much am like in the flow, like what feels good, what do I feel like I want to say? So I can really relate to that. I want to insert an early hot take from you. You just mentioned that you really focused on that prefix, the anti. My question to you is why do you feel like that word anti? Because I mean, if you look at it just in a silo, right, it's technically a word with like a negative connotation typically. So, why do you feel like the word anti was so attractive to your ideal customer? And any like marketing psychology around that you want to share, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think so. We were coming up with the word for antisocial school, and the whole premise of antisocial school is to build a client attraction strategy where you're not dependent on the social algorithm. And so I was like, what do we call it? I want it to be a school, I want it to be a class. And the word anti just kept coming up because I feel like it just hit what the goal of the school was so fast. And I think in today's culture, like if you don't get what somebody's talking about, you're going to lose the person. And so I actually was very nervous that the word antisocial was going to make people think she's not social at all, she's not using social media, but it actually did the opposite. It created this like culture of people are asking questions like, what does this actually mean? Like, I see you on social, so how are you antisocial? So it created this like conversation, which has really really been cool. And everyone's like, when is this opening again? When are you talking about again? So it's been neat to sort of follow that. But I mean, I was nervous, if I'm being honest, at first, because the word anti is not something that you think of this like, oh, I want to be part of this. But I think people at the time, and it sort of ebbs and flows, were so burnt out on social media that when I say antisocial, they're like, I want to learn more. And I think that's what has attracted people to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a pattern interrupt, right? I think anytime you see a contrarian view or opinion, you can't help yourself. You want to like stop and observe or engage. And I don't know if that's just because we're naturally as humans kind of drawn a little bit to controversy and like polarizing conversations, but I think to your point, it really does spark that conversation and it really magnetizes people who, like you said, are on the extreme ends of like, I hate social. I'm completely burnt out. I don't want to be on it anymore. And so I can see how it would be extra appealing to people who are feeling that way. Even though, of course, like you just mentioned, that's not necessarily how you feel about social, but just the fact that it's like to me, at least when I heard antisocial school, it felt like a beacon of hope to people who felt like this was the only way that you could build an online business. So I can really see how that's attractive. And I feel like that's a good lead into the execution of this actual launch that we're referring to. Again, for our listeners, the $70,000 launch in November of last year that was done completely off of social in line with this idea of antisocial school. So leading up to this, just a little context for our listeners, Holly had lost her main Instagram account of 14,000 followers, basically had to start completely over with a fresh account. And you decided to adopt this strategy that I've seen, quite a few people do nowadays, but I'm just kind of curious like why you chose this, which is the 9 grid strategy. Essentially, for our listeners, if you've never seen this before, it's like when you go to someone's Instagram profile and on their main feed, it's literally like 9 images on their grid
Mhm.
and that's it. They may have more posts elsewhere, like on their reels or whatnot, but on their actual profile feed, it's 9 images. So, Holly, talk to us about the 9 grid.
Yeah. So the 9 grid is really interesting. I will say though, when we launched this, my old account didn't exist. So the 14,000 was gone. And all I had was this like new account with like 200 people in it. So I didn't have anything during this launch, but I have then since taken my old account and implemented this 9 grid strategy. And for me, I think the 9 grid is twofold. If you don't want a presence on social, but we all know, what do we do when we talk to somebody or we listen to a podcast? We immediately go to Instagram and we like, I say, Google the person on Instagram. It
Yeah.
gives you a presence, right? So it just gives you a presence so they can learn who you are. I think the caveat with the 9 grid is if you have it, you have to be pointing people to somewhere else. Like it's not going to magically work for you. You have to have some sort of other client attraction strategy that's not Instagram or social where you're bringing people into your world. But if you have that, it's just not something that you want to deal with right now, then it's a great sort of like placeholder for, hey, this is who I am, but here's where you can learn more. And so that's really where I've seen it be the most effective. I don't think you should use it if you're like, I don't want to be on social or share my story anywhere. I'm just going to put it out there and hope that it works for me. That's when it's
Mhm.
not going to work. So what we did was we took our old account and we put a 9 grid up there because people were on it and saw it, but I actually like my new account better. I like the smaller account. I get to know people better. And honestly, I'm using it as a test to really share like, hey, you can launch some pretty significant things and have a very successful business with not a ton of followers. And so I really thought it was important to set that example, but that's how we've used it. And I think if you need a break from social or you want to dabble in some other things and you don't have a big team, it's a great sort of starting point so that you don't lose, people looking who you are and what you do.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. So you're kind of approaching the 9 grid as a redirect of sorts, right? Instead of like landing on a 404 error page, like, oh, this account doesn't exist. It's like, instead, it's like, hey, glad you're here. Here's where you should actually go engage with me. So I think that's actually really smart. On a probably less, expansive degree, I've seen this, like, my friend Dana Snyder, I remember one time I hopped on her Twitter and it literally said, like, back when Twitter was alive, but it said something like, "Hey, I'm Dana, like, I'm not here, but you can find me," or like, "I'm not on Twitter, but you can find me here," and I think it pointed to, like, LinkedIn or something. So I love that idea of using it as a redirect and a way to introduce who you are, what you stand for, who you're helping. Super smart. As far as the redirect, when people would land on the 9 grid or would land on your smaller new social account, if the launch wasn't happening on social, where were you directing people?
Yeah. So this is my favorite part of the whole process. And this, I think anyone can ask themselves this. And this is, where does your audience hang out? I think I do have an audience on social media, but for me, podcasting has really been my entire background. So I have a podcast. I love podcasting. I think I spoke on 300 different podcasts last year. So, like, my audience is there. And I was like, okay, going back to how I just shared, like, if you're not on social, you've got to have a way to bring people in, right? So my idea was, I'm going to create a private podcast. We already have a public podcast. I'm going to create a private podcast. And that private podcast is going to be so niche down, right? So I call it like micro niching. It's going to be so niche down and it's going to give the entire framework of Antisocial School. So it's 6 episodes, I think 7 now. We've added some bonus episodes. And I basically laid out the whole framework of, if you want to create a presence and don't want to be dependent on social media, this is what you do. And each of the episodes were like 10 or 15 minutes. There was like assignments. We created an email series behind the scenes so you could ask me questions on email, not on social. And that's really what I shared. And so I would get on podcasts and I would talk about it. I would put it in my email, like anything that I could do to get people to listen to that podcast is what I shared. And I think I put in my case study, we had a 6-week launch runway. 5 of those weeks, 4.5, were sharing that podcast. So it was just nonstop talking about it to get people to listen to it, to get people to understand what this whole Antisocial School concept was. And then we launched Antisocial School on the back end of that.
That's amazing. That 6 episode series, which I know you said you've added bonuses since, aside from covering the framework of Antisocial School, did you have a quote unquote hard pitch or hard sell at the end of that podcast? Was it leading to a sales page that then did the selling? Like, where did the sale actually take place?
Yeah. So at the time, it didn't really lead to the sales page because, if I'm being honest, the sales page wasn't done yet. So I was like, okay, where can I point people to? And so the goal was that they opted into the podcast, and then I had their email. And then eventually it did lead to a wait list. I still use the wait list strategy today. So you can listen to the podcast anytime. It wasn't hard selling. I guess I don't really even believe in hard selling, if I'm being really honest, but
I
it
love
was
the
more of,
honesty. Yeah.
if you'd like to learn more, here's how you can get the whole framework. Kind of like, we've given you, a piece of the pie. I can only teach so much in a private podcast. If you would like to learn more, here's how you can do that. And we started to do that in episodes, I think it was like 4, 5, and 6. And it was just like a little tidbit of, like, if you'd like to learn more, send an email or reply to this word or whatever it was. And then after they opted in, they eventually did get sales emails when we opened the doors.
Got it. Okay, that's actually really helpful because I've kind of been on the listening side of both types of private podcasts. One where it's like it's almost like a webinar broken down into a podcast where there is like a direct pitch at the end. But I like for yours, it's more of like a I think you even used this word when you were pitching us your case study, like a hand raise, like a, "Hey, I'm kind of interested in this concept and I want to continue to be told more about this thing," right? So, I love that you're directing people to an email list and then sending them through a sales sequence. I'm curious, you just brought up this stat and you said it so casually. So, I'm like just blown away that you did 300 interviews in 2022 just for that's like almost one a week. That's insane. So
It was a little insane.
oh, not one a week, one a day. Sorry. I'm like, there's not 365 weeks in a year, 365 days. Anyways, that's almost one a day, which is wild. I want to know when you said, like you said it with such confidence, like I know my audience is on podcasts, listening to podcasts. How did you know that prior to jumping in, full force with podcast guesting? Did was there some data in your business that led you to that conclusion? Was it just a hunch that turned out to be right? Like, why did you choose podcast guesting as your primary traffic source for this launch?
Yeah, I would say it's twofold. So I always say, look at facts, not feelings. And so my facts told me in some of our higher ticket products, the people were coming, our clients were coming from podcasts. Like I would ask them, hey, how did you find me? How did you connect with me? But also, I always say that you typically are your best client 2 to 3 years prior to where you're at. And that's where I consume data. I also know that my target client is most likely working full time in the corporate world and they don't have time to watch webinars. They don't have time to watch these like hour long, workshops of how to do something. And so I really tried to think about, okay, if you're driving to work and you want to learn how to build a client attraction strategy, could you listen to a 7 minute podcast episode? If you're like me, you listen to it on the way to work. And then, like, when you get into the parking lot, you like write the notes down and then you go into your job. And so I was really trying to think about how are my clients and my ideal customers consuming things. And that's really where it was at.
Yeah, no, that is a really helpful tip, like thinking about where you got your information when you were starting out. So, love that source for determining your strategy. The 300 podcast interviews, how far in advance did you have to plan and pitch to get on that many shows? I mean, that is such a large volume. Did you go through a media season tour where you were like just basically nonstop on 2 to 3 podcasts every day? Or did you truly sparse it out? I mean, as much as you can, given it was such a large volume over the course of the entire year. Like, what was your process for actually acquiring that volume of guest spots?
So it's interesting when you speak on podcasts, when you just get started, you tend to get on more podcasts. And so at the beginning, it just happened very organically. And so one of my favorite questions at the end of like any podcast interview is like, well, how can I help you? So I'm interviewing for people on my show. And then at the end, I'm like, well, how can I help you? Or if I'm being interviewed for another show, and then at the end, I'm like, how can I help you? And so it kind of just became this like organic network. And then I layered on, okay, I'm going to very strategically reach out to specific podcasts. I try really, really hard to keep them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday if I can, so that I have like a little bit of break on the end. And I won't lie, like after we went through that season, I was like, I'm just going to take a step back for a
That's
minute,
a lot.
like take a breath. But it's really cool how it sort of panned out because the more you speak about your business, like the better you get at it. And the more questions people ask you, the more you understand what they actually want to know, which has led to sort of other, product developments and things like that. And I think for me, it's so much easier for me to speak on a podcast than it is to write 17 emails or whatever the thing is. And so I just knew if I want to be able to grow, like that's my client attraction strategy. So I just kind of went all in.
And I think it's a brilliant what you said about, and I don't think anyone's framed it quite that way. So I just want to re-highlight that what you shared about every time you talking about your offer, your business, you get better at talking about it, more succinct, more clear. And I also love how you utilize the host's questions almost as like mini market research to understand, like you said, where the curiosities are, what areas you could be diving deeper into, what are the areas of interest. So that is really, really smart. I do want to ask you, here's another, I guess, like hot take moment for you. I know you really believe in the 80/20 rule in what you teach your own students. So, if you apply that to your own experience of guesting on 300 podcasts last year, do you feel that rule was true? As in, do you feel that 20% of those 300 podcasts were the ones who actually brought the most traffic and most impact to your launch? Or do you feel like it was actually pretty evenly spread out and that volume was actually necessary to reach the goals that you did?
No, they were not equal, by totally not equal. And we'll even see it like behind the scenes. Like we'll look at our email list and my husband actually tracks our analytics and he was like, what happened today? Because, we'll get like 100 new subscribers in like a couple hours, and that's not normal. And so it's like, oh, this podcast episode went live or this happened. And so I would say they are not all created equal. And, sort of learning from that experience, now I'm a little bit more choosy on, okay, which ones do I want to be a guest on? What makes the most sense? But I think the experience of talking that much, like, I would totally do again because it taught me so much about how to introduce myself, where to point people, what message resonates. And then even going back to the launch, like, what are some of the pain points that we want to call out? And I don't think I would have had that data if I hadn't have done that.
Absolutely. I love that it served a different purpose for you. If you were to redo that guesting strategy again for traffic, for driving traffic to your private podcast, how many podcasts do you think you would shoot for now to guest on? Like reducing that volume from 300, how many targeted shows do you think you'd actually go after this time?
I feel like we probably had one or two a month that really brought in traffic. So if you could strategically pick the ones that would do that, which actually is very hard, you never know. I would say 1 to 2 a month. Like, doesn't have to be crazy. And that's actually what I teach my students. Like, if you could just strategically put yourself in front of an audience once a week, ideally that means once a month something is going to, come through, and that's where you're going to start to build traction.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you do really, really well, Holly, that I admire about you is a lot of people go on podcasts, right? And I feel that I've done this too myself, where it kind of is just like you show up, you're not really sure what's going to happen. You kind of just go with the flow, fly by the seat of your pants. And there's not really a lot of intentionality behind the action that the listener is supposed to take after they hear the interview. Whereas you approach podcast guesting very differently, obviously, since it is the main traffic source for the launch, at least that we're talking about in this particular case study. So when you were on these shows, I would love for you to kind of break down for our listeners, how did you drive people to take action after listening instead of just going, oh, that was a nice conversation with Holly, move on to the next thing? What did that call to action look like? What resources did you have prepared, or what opt-in did you have prepared? Or was it literally just a straight to like, hey, if you liked what I talked about today, go listen to my private podcast?
I love these questions so much. Okay, so first, I would say I always go into an interview with intention of what are topics that I can talk about that not only support the show that I'm going on, but also support me. Because if I came on here and talked about real estate, right? My husband's a realtor, that would make zero sense. And I would have nothing. I mean, we could talk about it, I could give you my opinions, but I would have nowhere to point you afterwards. And so I try to at least incorporate a couple of key topics every single time. And going back to what we were talking about before, if you're talking about something over and over again, you get better at it. So there's a little bit of self-improvement there. But at the end, every episode, they always ask, like, Holly, share where people can connect with you more. And I have found the best way to do that is to point people to one place. So instead of saying like 17 different places, like, come find me on Instagram, come download my XYZ, come to my website, I am very specific and I'll tell a story because that's what people remember. And I will say, I loved talking about this topic. Obviously, we all want to scale a business where we're not sitting in front of our laptop all day. This is my favorite line. I can only share so much in 45 minutes or whatever the time frame is. If you go here, you can download my whole framework for free. And by the way, I'm behind the scenes answering questions. So just come connect with me and I can't wait to talk more. I will share one link. That's it. And so it's very consistent and they hear the story and that tends to make them remember it.
Okay, so smart. Chef's kiss. I just love that tip. I feel like that is worth this whole case study for someone to hear, leaving the CTA as a story, because stories are what humans remember. Like, we know that innately, but I don't think anyone's ever said that out loud on our show. So I really, really, really love that approach. That's so, so smart that you tell it as a story. And I couldn't agree more with the less links you share, the more likely someone will actually follow through on this. I feel like the same is true even, for example, like even for link trees, right? Like that's why I don't really believe in link trees, because people have like 25 links and people have decision fatigue. They just don't know where to go and they feel confused. So giving them one clear specific action, I think, is just so, so smart. And then of course, like you said, telling it like a story. So people who, do decide to take action on that, they go over, they opt into your private podcast, they listen to the 6 or more part series, they get on your list, they're starting to receive these sales emails. For this particular live launch that we are talking about today, how many sales emails did you send them to sign up for the live launch of Antisocial School?
Yeah. So when you sign up for the podcast is called Ditch the Social Drama. I think you get 6 or 7 emails, and most of them are, and these are not sales emails. These are like, listen to this, do this. If you have questions, reply yes, or whatever the interaction is. And so that comes first. And then after that, I always do live launches for a period of 7 to 10 days. This was 7 days. I like to do Tuesday through Monday so that you have the weekend to regroup, is what I call it, especially if you're working full time. It gives you like a minute to take your breath. So we did 7 day launch period. And I don't remember the exact emails. I think it was 10 maybe. I mean, we definitely send one every day. And then on the last day, we send 2 or 3. But the audience was so warm, right? Like they already knew exactly what I was talking about, why they needed to do it. We actually have case studies in the podcast so you can see like how it's worked. And so it just became this like really easy, I'll knock on wood, easy launch where I didn't feel like I was like pulling people across the finish line. It was like, let's do this together. You already know me because you've heard my voice. You've seen like how I write and how I communicate. I'm literally walking the walk because I think our Instagram had like, 200 people at the time. So you could see it really come to life.
The 6 to 7 emails that you said, I would actually like to, I guess, dig a little deeper, expand on that concept. You said like you're telling people, okay, do this, listen to this, and then reply this if you have a question. What do you mean by that? Like when you say do this, like give us an example of an action you would tell someone to do. Or when you say listen to this, were you redirecting people again back to the private podcast or directing them to listen to something else?
So I think this is the magic. It was actually interaction with me. And to this day, I'm still the one that responds. So you get the first email and it's like, here's your playlist, right, of your antisocial strategy. Listen to episode 1. And I think in episode 1, we're talking about like how to introduce yourself and what you're known for. Hit reply and let me know, what did you come up with? Not everyone replies, but I'm giving you homework. So not only are you able to listen to it, but you can actually take action and do it. And so some of the emails are like that. Some of them are what you mentioned earlier. I call them hand raisers. Well, I'll be like, if you liked episode 3, here's actually 3 more episodes on our other podcast where you can learn about client attraction or setting up an email list or whatever the topic was. So I'm nurturing them and giving them more resources to get to know me. And then actually our best performing email ever, the subject line is margaritas at 3 p.m., which I can't remember why I wrote that, but it was like a crazy day and I love margaritas and I was like, I just want to like sit outside and drink a margarita instead of doing all these other things that I need to do. And inside the email, I wrote, hey, I know that you're getting a lot of emails from me, but guess what? I'm a real person. I'm going through this like you are. If you want to see how this client attraction strategy works, DM me or reply, show me, and I'll show you. And I actually did a mini client attraction audit. So they had to fill out a Google Doc and then I would send a Loom video back. So they are like, when I send a Loom video back, people are blown away. They're like, I can't believe that you're actually responding, or it's not like you used my name. I get that a lot. But what I find is if I can take, 5 minutes to actually share how this is going to help them, I'm not having to do a sales call, which saves me time. I'm showing them how it's going to work for them. And then in the end, they can make the decision of if they want to work with me or not.
That's an incredible value give. I mean, yes, the personalization, yes, the fact that you respond to things yourself, which I know people can be really surprised by in this age of automation. So I really appreciate that you do that. But you're like taking it one step further and saying, I'm actually going to like give you a customized preview of what this looks like. And I mean, that's so rare, especially in courses or, programs similar to that. So, wow, I'm very impressed by that. For the people though so like, you're giving them mini homework assignments, keeping them actionable throughout their process of listening to the private podcast and engaging with you, which I love. Do you though at any or on any of these emails, like the first, let's say 5 to 6 emails, are you giving them the link to purchase or the option to purchase in those emails as well? Because I know, for example, like some people like myself, I feel like I'm kind of a fast decision maker when it comes to like, do I want this or not? So sometimes I don't need to be nurtured for multiple emails. It's like, just give me the checkout link and like, we're good to go, you know? Do you offer that option in each email or do you truly wait until the very last like 2 emails to do so?
I'm a fast decision maker too. I feel like we have a PS at the first email and says, if you want to skip all of this and you just want to know how to get to the next step, go here. Or we'll do like a PS, in the next couple of emails, we're going to talk to you about how to take action and join our next cohort. You can click here now if you don't want to wait. So we kind of do something where it's like, if you want to, you can, but it's not like a hard sell. And then I feel like email 6 or 7, it's like your chance to learn more or whatever the wording is coming tomorrow. And then we'll start the sales emails after that.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're like almost teasing the sales emails. And then how many emails come in the sales sequence?
I think it's 10. I think we do one a day and then we do 2 or 3 the last day. So it's a good, 6 to 10 on the nurturing and then 6 to 10 on the sales. If we're not in a sales period, because now the course is evergreen and it'll take you to a wait list, you get the same emails, but it just will take you to a wait list. And then when we open the doors, we'll offer it to the wait list first.
Got it. Okay. And then the 10 emails that are in the sales sequence, would you be able to just like high level kind of walk us through what the purpose of each email is? I ask because I know some emails, it's like, okay, email number 3 is all about, addressing this specific objection, but email 4 is about highlighting a past client case study. So I would love to hear like what your unique approach to your sales emails look like.
Yeah. So I really like to answer questions, but also talk about what you're going to get. So I always say, like, the first sales email is always like, what's the thing? Like, what's the thing that you're getting? Doors are open. It's like usually a pretty easy email to write because it's like, here's the thing. The next couple of emails, I would say emails 2, 3, and 4, is really calling out, who is this for? What objections do people have, right? So you're answering the questions. This is for you. If do you feel this way? Here's how I can help. Answering objections. And then I would say, the last kind of set of emails is really talking about, well, what happens if you don't do this? They always say, like, talk about the pain points or whatever the thing is. But to me, it's like, okay, you can keep doing what you're doing or you can do this. And so, I would say, just to recap, the first email would be, here's your thing. And then the second email would be, is this for you? Like, are you this person? And then the third, fourth, and fifth emails would be answering the objections. Like, will this work for me? But also, do I have enough time? Like, I always say that if you can answer the questions all around time and money, then most people who are on the fence are going to be like, okay, this is for me. So if I can tell you how much time it's going to take and I can show you that the investment is worth it, like, these are case studies of clients that have gone through this program. And this is what happens. This is the value that you're going to get. If I can paint that picture, then I feel like the sales piece is much easier.
I totally agree. And the 3 most common objections, right? Like I don't have time, I don't have money, or I'm not sure if it's the right fit or I need to think about it further, right? So, I totally agree that being able to provide like a breakdown that feels tangible and logical for people who need that sort of assurance is really helpful. To wrap up our case study, I'm kind of curious, like, you know how when you are on the receiving end of sales emails, there's usually some sort of last ditch might not be like the right term, but kind of like a last ditch incentive for people who are still on the fence at the very last hour. And for some people, it's like, okay, we're going to bring in a 12 pay plan where previously there was only a 3 pay plan, if that's going to be what pushes you over the edge. Or like sometimes people will bring in last minute, we're opening our calendar for sales calls if you really need to talk one on one with a human over a Zoom call. For you, do you have any sort of like last ditch incentive to get those fence sitters off the fence?
Yeah, such a good question. We've done a bunch of different things. I was actually going to share. So, the sales page framework that I use is actually with the story brand. And one of my biggest tips when writing sales emails is actually following your sales page because it's literally walks you through all the different pieces, right? Like, if you think of all the different sections. And one of the things that the story brand does is at the end, so you're at the end of your open cart, here's how you can get antisocial success. So I say you can get antisocial success in 3 simple steps. Step 1, join the next cohort. What happens when you join the cohort? I explain it. Step 2, I'll actually do a client attraction audit for you. I'm going to tell you what's missing and then you can dig in. Like, I'm literally walking them through what happens when they join. And I think sometimes we get lost reading all the sales emails that we forget, like, well, what actually happens when I say yes? So that's one thing that I've used that has worked really well. I think the other thing, you can always do bonuses. We tend to just like lay all our bonuses out on the line at the beginning. I just really hate the like scarcity effect of sales. It's just not my favorite. It makes me feel icky. So I tend to not do it a lot. But for us, Antisocial School is usually only open once a quarter. So it's kind of like, if you don't do this now, what's going to happen? So, we always say, like, if you continue to do what you're doing, like, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I say, if you don't make a change, your business isn't going to make it for you. So that is something that has worked really well. Sometimes we'll throw in like some bonuses, like if really want to get started, you get a 30-minute or 15-minute strategy call with me or something like that. But honestly, I found with this sort of like live launch private podcast, like they already have gotten so much that I really didn't need a lot of bonuses at the end, knock on wood. So we've launched it 5 times so far, and we haven't really had to do any of those like crazy things. It's just been more of a organic, using those hand raisers, referring back to the podcast. We will add bonus episodes to the private podcast. So we'll add client results so you can hear clients talk through what they did. Um, we just had a client get on the Food Network and we shared her story and how she did it. And so I feel like that has been more valuable sometimes than just throwing in like, let's do 17 more calls, because most of my clients don't have time to do that. So I think it's really thinking about what do they want and then what happens if they don't do anything.
That's so helpful, especially the reminder that you gave that you also need to help paint the picture of what happens in those first few minutes after they enroll or the first week, right? Because you're right. Sometimes we're so focused on like getting someone to the decision that we don't really help them see what happens after they say yes. So that was a really, really helpful reminder. And I got to say, in a world of quick, 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 and a lot of hype on social, it's really refreshing having this conversation with you, Holly, and hearing how you've had so much success off of social and then also with like more of a slow burn type of relationship building. I think that's really admirable. And again, just inspires and encourages people who want to do business a little bit differently. So thank you so much for your insights and wisdom today and sharing your case study. I feel like we already did a practice run of this because you showed
Right?
it in your case study, but what can people do to continue to connect with you or where can they go?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about our antisocial framework, you can just go to hollymariehaynes.com/social. You're going to get all the podcast episodes we just chatted about. You know that I'm behind the scenes answering the questions, but I think in this case, you can see the hand raisers. You can see the nurture sequence that we just talked through. It'll be a really cool experiment to really listen to this podcast and then see it in play.
Oh, yes. Okay, I didn't even think about that, but that is so true. It's like this is like the true behind the scenes. Like if you want the details, you got to go often. If even for your own research. So, we'll make sure to link Holly's link to get that below. So go check out the show notes if you're listening or the YouTube description if you're watching. Thank you again, Holly, for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much.